Hello, folks. Welcome to the Genuinely Interested podcast. I'm your host, Roy Bensby. This podcast is an opportunity for me to speak with some of the most interesting people I know, either with amazing talents or achievements or unbelievable life stories or just invaluable insights into areas which they have dedicated their lives to studying. I sit down with these amazing individuals from across the planet and I try to ask them questions that will hopefully help you, the listener, extract something valuable or learn something new or just hopefully get inspired by. You can find all the episodes for the podcast on all the major podcasting platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, Google, Overcast, iHeartRadio, literally all of them. It's there. If you love the show, if it adds value to your life in any way, shape, or form, please leave reviews on iTunes. It really helps grow the podcast. It puts it up there so more people can see it. You can also find all the episodes and everything else, all the information that's updated regularly on the website, which is roybensv.com, ROYBENTZVI.com, and you can sign up for updates as well. Also been updating the YouTube channel, so I've been uploading old episodes pretty much on a daily basis, so you can find it there. And in the future, I hope to make video podcasting as well. If that's something you guys want to check out and are interested in, please shoot me email. I'd love to hear from you. And also make sure to check out the social media platforms, Instagram and Twitter. I post there daily. And lastly, if you guys want to support and help grow the podcast, please go to Buy Me a Coffee or Anchor or Patreon. It is an endeavor to grow this podcast and make it what it should be. And it takes a village. So I want to thank each and every one of you for listening. I see that there are literally listeners from all over the world in each and every country. So thank you to everyone, and on to the show. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. This week we have Amelia Pang. She is an author of the new book Made in China, A Prisoner in SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. I got the book a few days ago, or maybe by the time you hear this, it'll be a couple of weeks. But regardless, I just started reading it a few days ago. Great book, super interesting conversation we should be having more of. And I'll let you listen to the podcast so you can learn more about this. She's also an award-winning investigative journalist of Uighur and Chinese descent. So what's happening in China right now with the Uighur people is an atrocity that is of magnitudes unimaginable. The stories coming out of China with the Uighur population, with the Falun Gong, with what they are going through in these labor camps, in these forced labor camps, the Chinese government is calling them now re-education camps, is beyond horrific. It's a human rights atrocity. And not too many people are willing to speak up about this topic. And the Chinese government is essentially given free rein to lock people up based on their religious belief, based on ethnicity. And really, there's no sanctions. There's no, UN panels. It's just not a lot of momentum happening on the other side to try to stop this. And it's a real shame. It's millions of people. And I'm not going to go into the details of what they go through and what is happening to them there. We cover that in the podcast. Just know it's really bad. It's worse than you can imagine. So I'm happy that Amelia is bringing this to the forefront, is shedding light on this topic. She's obviously of Uighur descent, so there is much more meaning to this for her. So yeah, let's just jump right into it. There's a lot of information on this episode. Obviously, a little dark because of the subject matter, but what can you do? There's topics that you have to talk about sometimes, and they're dark or they're not happy and they're not nice things to talk about, but we have to talk about them. They're happening, and that's the only way to really create any sort of dialogue. That's the only way to educate people is to talk about this. And it's not even educating. It's just educating in the sense that, hey, this is happening. What can we do? So without further ado, Here is Amelia Pang. Enjoy the episode, everyone.
The Genuinely Interested Podcast.
Hi, Roy. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
Are you enjoying the the winter on the east?
um, yeah, some days more than others, but
Yeah, it's kind of depressing, man. I'm probably the only person that loves winter. Like I truly love winter. And we had like a great February. It was snowing. I was happy. It was cold, and then it became springtime for the last like week and a half. And
yeah.
now there was like one day of winter. Now it feels like it's spring again. So I'm a little upset, but other than that, it's
Well, you never know. We might get snow again. Yeah, that's climate
right.
change for you.
Maybe like in May,
Yeah,
like it'll flip over.
I wouldn't even be surprised.
No, I wouldn't either. So thanks for coming on the podcast. I've been wanting to talk about this topic for a while, and I'm glad I could get you on. Maybe give a little some background about you and your story before we kind of get into it.
Yeah, so I am a journalist who is of Chinese and Uyghur descent. What's happening with the massive amount of detaining of Uyghurs in labor camps is an issue of personal significance to me. And my book is not just about the Uyghurs, but it's also about the larger forced labor system in China. It's the largest forced labor system that exists in the world today that's still in operation. And there's camps all throughout China detaining many different demographics. And many of them are manufacturing goods for countries all over the world, especially the US. But the book also talks about, that connection to us as consumers, what we can do to address the issue, and some of our own consumption habits that contribute to making it really easy for factories to use forced labor in China.
Yeah, and I just got the book. Thank you for sending it, by the way, a few days ago. It's called "Made in China: A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods." And I just started getting. I just started reading it a few nights ago, and it's absolutely fascinating. But I still have a lot to read. But before we get into the book and the whole issue, maybe just learn a little bit more about you. You were born here in the U.S., correct?
Yes, I was born in the US, but I grew up in a Mandarin speaking household.
Hmm.
My parents didn't speak very good English, so I'm pretty fluent for someone who's born in the US.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so that actually really helped with my reporting. When I went to China in early 2019 to visit the camps, I could blend in and talk to the guards, and
Do
they
they know? Do they like pick up that you're foreign, or they have no idea?
I think it didn't matter. I don't know if they did or didn't, but they didn't care. They were very open to talking about what kind of products they made inside. The prisoners inside were working, and I told them I was from an overseas company that wanted to buy products from them, and they were very all agreed to sell products made by prisoners to my fake company.
Yeah.
The system isn't even really hidden very well.
Wow, that's crazy. The reason I ask is because sometimes, for example, my wife, she's Indian, and she's fluent, but when she goes to India, they can pick up that she's not from there, even though she speaks the language,
Mhm,
she looks.
mhm.
But you can just pick up when someone is
Yeah.
not from that place based on like these little things. That's why I asked.
Yeah, China is it's just such a large country, and many different regions will have very, very different accents to the point where sometimes one region can't understand the other. There's different dialects. So it's
Yeah,
not that uncommon to meet someone who just seems very different from the way that you speak and the way that you dress and these kind of customs. So yeah, I
yeah.
don't think it raised any red flags.
So I guess what prompted you to write the book? When does this, start brewing, and when did you decide to write it?
Yeah, well, the main story I feature in the book, I first heard about it the same time the world did, really, in early, well, actually, in early 2013,
Hmm.
when an American woman finds an SOS letter, and that letter goes viral. So the book opens with uh, a suburban mom named Julie Keith from Oregon. She's a pretty average American. She is planning her child's Halloween party and looking for Halloween decorations. She goes to her storage shed to see what she has, and she remembers that she has this package of Halloween decorations from Kmart that she never opened, that somebody had gifted to her because it's one of those things that it was purchased for the only reason why it was purchased was because it was so cheap. Nobody actually even had a need for it. It sat in a storage shed for 2 years and was kind of passed around. And when she finally opened it, she was shocked to find an SOS letter written by the political prisoner in China who had made and manufactured this very product. And this letter was actually one of several letters that this prisoner and multiple prisoners at that camp collectively worked together and risked their lives to write. But it was the only one that was discovered, possibly because there was only one that maybe people actually bought or even actually opened after it was bought.
Yeah.
It was just one of those really trivial kind of disposable things. Um, and yeah, it was these styrofoam headstones, and which were really chilling because although these were decorative headstones, um, they were manufactured in a labor camp where there were actual graves where people were buried if when they um, passed away from either torture or just being overworked. These are really grueling places,
Wow.
and and so actually this particular letter, although it went viral, it really was not the first or the last letter of this kind to be found by a Western consumer. The first one was in the 90s and it was sent by a political dissident named Chen Kong. He was a pro-democracy activist. And some of the more recent ones include even 2019 and 2020. They were discovered in the UK, by a British grocery chain. Somebody had bought Christmas cards and found SOS letters in them. It's really just an ongoing issue, and whenever it happens, and the person who finds it goes to the press, it goes viral, and people are so concerned and they express outrage, but nobody ever actually looks at how this product made in a labor camp actually ended up selling in our stores. What were the problems in our supply chain that allowed this to happen?
Yeah.
What are the problems with the way that our corporations are auditing their factories, uh, to have allowed them to miss such a red flag? And so that was what I aimed to explore with this book.
And I guess when does that correlate with you finding out about your Uyghur heritage? Because it's not something you grew up knowing, correct?
Yes, that's a whole other part of the my story. Yeah, I wrote a New York Times op-ed about losing and finding my Uyghur heritage again. But that's not the focus of the book is. But
Yeah.
yeah, my family is part Uyghur. My grandmother was Uyghur. She grew up in Xinjiang, which is really where most of the Uyghurs live. They're a Turkic minority in China. And she knew the language, she knew the culture. A lot of her siblings remained in Xinjiang and knew the language, but it wasn't really passed down to her children for a number of reasons, but one of them was the fact that it is hard. It's really hard to be a Uyghur in China. You don't really have a lot of it's hard to have a good life and not face a lot of discrimination. Well, before the criticism was that China's policies for Uyghur were more like a cultural genocide, or maybe race based discriminations. Um, but in recent years, those kinds of policies have significantly worsened to the point where um, there's currently a genocide happening to the Uyghurs. The There's been hard evidence that um, in just between 2015 and 2018 alone, in just those few years, there was an 84% decrease in population size, in birth rates in
Hmm.
two of the largest Uyghur prefectures.
Wow.
And suppression of birth is one of the five UN criteria for genocide. So in the midst of a genocide, these people are being detained and working in labor camps and manufacturing our goods. So that's something that I did want to highlight, and hope the listeners can take away that it's not just a prison. These facilities, it's not just an ordinary prison. It's literally a camp where people die, and the suppression of birth is occurring at a pretty wide scale.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to know. I'll be honest. I have never heard of Uyghurs up until maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago at best. And I think probably most people also haven't. And then it's so sad because when you do hear of it, it's tied in to these labor camps. It's tied into this genocide, and that's the first time I actually heard of the Uyghur people. And I was like, okay, wait, what's going on? What these people are getting, put into labor camps, and they're being quote unquote. There's now it's called re-education camps by the Chinese government. And I guess when you were doing the research, how did you go about infiltrating or penetrating a country that keeps most of these atrocities and keeps basically silences dissidents and keeps most of the atrocities in the dark as much as they can?
Yeah, the surveillance and for the Uyghur camps in Xinjiang and other factories associated with the Uyghur labor transfer program are the surveillance there is pretty tight. It's really hard to visit and document the camps that are detaining Uyghurs and forcing them to manufacture products. But those are only one type. That's mostly because the there's so much media attention on these camps. Uh, so so it's really so I wasn't able to actually visit the Uyghur camps, but the Uyghur camps are just one kind of camp. There's so many different types of extra legal detention centers that are where people, especially political dissidents, religious dissidents, ethnic minorities, and most likely the Hong Kong activists that are being imprisoned at the moment. A lot of them are detained in these types of facilities, and a lot of them haven't been sentenced. They haven't had access to a lawyer, and they all pretty much had to do manufacturing work in these so-called pretrial detention centers or drug detox centers. Facilities with pretty innocuous names, but really they're all labor camps, and you can actually visit those. These are not particularly high profile. They haven't been written about extensively in the Western media, so they kind of have their guards down regarding these areas. So I was actually able to go to some drug detox centers and pre-trial detention centers and regular prisons, and just follow the trucks uh, that left these facilities, and talk to the guards there and confirm that the prisoners really were doing manufacturing work inside. and when I followed the trucks, I found that nobody stopped me from doing that, or um,
So they're pretty open about it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. They're actually really open about it because they often work with the business community, whether it's other Chinese suppliers or other types of companies from overseas that want to buy products from them. It's just part of their day to day work. It's not really unusual if you show up and start asking questions.
Wow. That's pretty brazen. I mean, it seems like initially the Chinese government kind of dismissed or denied that these camps existed. I think that was kind of like the stance in the beginning, and now they changed the narrative, saying that they're eradicating extremism, that they're making these people more confident, more independent, like all these different lies. And it's just it's the same thing. They're just putting a new label on it.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been really inconsistent about their explanations for these camps.
And I guess I know what the stance is of the Chinese government, but the people. I mean, over here, obviously, not everyone, but some people are, talking about it. I guess there's not too much you can do to course correct what's going on over, with the Chinese government. But as far as the people, are they outraged? Are they ambivalent? Like, what are some responses in China by general population?
I think Hong Kong's a different story, but in terms of mainland China, the general population, a lot of them might not be aware of what's actually happening in these so-called vocational training centers or de-radicalization centers, um, because they only have access to state-controlled media, um, who convey these places, portray these places as really great places that are where people are happy and they're getting job training and we're really helping people. So I don't think the vast majority of people in China are quite aware of what's actually happening.
Wow, that's crazy. And I mean, maybe you can tell people what are some of the conditions that force these people to work in these labor camps. Like, what's a day in the life of someone in a labor camp?
It's pretty grueling. There's Torture is very common. Sexual violence is very prevalent. In particularly the Uyghur women camps, we're hearing counts of women being sold, and, as into sex slavery, essentially. Men will come visit them, and pay to get a room with them in the prison. It's
Really?
yeah, no, it's very, very, very disturbing. And after they're raped and tortured, they are manufacturing our goods. These camps have been associated with um, cotton fields, where a lot of the because Xinjiang is a huge producer of cotton, and a lot of our clothes are made from Xinjiang cotton. And these camps have been associated with the human hair extensions has gotten really popular these days.
Hmm.
That a lot of social media stars and celebrities like to wear, um, and they're also associated with the raw materials that make solar panels. They're manufacturing a lot of goods, different types of goods for the world, when they aren't being tortured and raped.
Why? I guess why is the world so? I don't know if fearful is the right word, but the right word, but definitely silent to some of these things that are just blatant. I mean, we all know it's happening, and if this was Spain or Finland committing such atrocities, I mean, we would sanction them, we would go to war, we would have the power to control them. But China just kind of seems to be able to do what it wants with little oversight or little just no real sanctions towards them.
Because China is an economic powerhouse now. And I think that is closely tied with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's $1 trillion economic development strategy. They've invested a lot of money. They have uh, relationships with countries with close to 70 countries, including a lot of Middle Eastern countries. China's investments through the Belt and Road Initiative
Could you
has
tell
really
people maybe what that is for people who may not know the Belt and Road Initiative?
sure. It's this massive, massive $1 trillion economic development strategy where China has invested um, billions of dollars, $1 billion here, $1 billion there to all these different countries, some of them developing countries that really need the money.
Mhm.
And in order to form these economic relationships, although some see it as more of a military strategy. Um, and and so a lot of countries all over the world have received a significant amount of economic development money from China, and they're just silent about whatever human rights abuses happen, including Middle Eastern countries, who are most of them are have not been voicing any concerns about what's happening to their fellow Muslim Uyghurs.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of geopolitics in that area. There's some of the Gulf nations, they have their own human rights atrocities that they're committing. So I doubt they'll be the first one on the podium to do something or say something against China. There was I remember I was watching a documentary a few years ago about the Falun Gong prisoners, which also the world was silent on, and they were being also detained in these labor camps, and they were it was what they were doing was forced organ harvesting. The Chinese government were doing forced organ harvesting, where if you needed, I don't know, let's say a liver, you could call them up, and if you're in Sweden, you say, hey, I need a liver, I'm dying, and they'll show like no problem, and then take some information, and you would come in a month, and they would have a perfectly viable, healthy liver. And
Mhm,
then it was called transplant tourism. And then I believe the first country to ban that was Israel.
mhm.
But I don't know if the rest of the world jumped on board. It kind of seemed to just go, out of sight, out of mind. But do you know what's happening with that? Is that something that's stopped? Is it still going on?
Oh, it's still going on for
Wow.
sure. It's it's hard evidence. I know it sounds so disturbing and scary. It almost sounds like a conspiracy theory, but there's medical experts have testified in the U.S. Congress, in European parliaments about just how it's medically impossible for China to be able to offer that many fresh organs and that many organ matches so quickly to people who show up overseas who are looking to take advantage of the organ tourism, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's just not medically possible, for the natural birth rate to match the amount of organs that are currently available and how fast the matches can be made. In fact, the China Tribunal in London, an independent panel of doctors, human rights lawyers, and other types of experts, looked at all the evidence in 2019 and concluded that there was proof beyond reasonable doubt that prisoners of conscience are being killed for their organs. The organ trade is a $1 billion a year industry in China. It's extremely lucrative and useful for China to kill political prisoners, um, and sell their organs. We're hearing accounts of this happening in Xinjiang. For a long time, the Falun Gong group were targeted because there are just so many of Falun Gong prisoners in China,
Mhm.
and they tend to not drink or smoke, and so they were seen as relatively healthy organs compared to maybe the average population, and so they were a huge target for the organ trade, the black organ trade. But now we're seeing a very, very large amount of evidence that the Uyghurs are being targeted in large, as well, because, I mean, after all, China already has the Uyghurs' biometric data.
Mhm.
In Xinjiang, it's mandatory for you to um, give your DNA samples, as
Really?
a part of yeah, the moment if you like arrive on a plane in Xinjiang, you're a Uyghur, or they just have all this information about you, where if they needed, it would just be so easy to find people to kill for the organ trade, based on the amount of information they have on people.
That is insanity. That is, I just don't know how that's not one of the biggest stories in the world. I mean, if you're on an organ transplant in any country, you could be waiting years, right? If you need
Mhm.
a liver, a lung,
Like,
whatever it is, years. And then you go to China, it's like, yeah, sure, come in, a month and it's fine. There's no problems. And you pay whatever you pay. And look, I mean, I understand if someone's dying, I understand the will not to die, but I don't understand a country that does this as a business and the world just, essentially turning the cheek, saying, no, it's, and that's something I guess I wanted to ask you. What do you think of Biden's comments where they asked him about what's happening with the Uyghurs? And he was like, culturally, there are different norms that each country and their leaders are expected to follow. He didn't really address it. And I thought that was such a missed opportunity to say something concrete about that situation.
yeah, that was a missed opportunity. I hope he'll revisit um, that statement and make additional comments later on. But it's still early in his administration. I'm hoping that maybe the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act could get passed under, hopefully, with the new administration. It did stall in the Senate last year, and now it's starting over. Um, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I know Canada just recently recognized China's
Yeah.
treatment of the Uyghurs as genocide. I guess why now, and why is it only Canada? I mean, I guess again we know it's an economic powerhouse, but here Canada was able to do it. Why doesn't the rest of the world follow suit?
The Netherlands followed suit actually recently as well. I think you're starting to get countries standing up one by one, but it's happening pretty slowly. I think the more it's hard for the first few
Yeah.
to really be the first to say it, that to call it a genocide. But once more start doing it, and you kind of form this alliance, then it's going to be a snowball. So I am hopeful.
And I mean, we know that China produces most of the world's goods. I guess how prevalent or what percentage of goods, if you even know, would you say are produced by the forced labor camps as a percentage of the total goods that they produce or export?
It's really hard to give an estimate because we don't know the extent of how many how many more labor camps are out there that hasn't been documented. In terms of the overall production, probably a relatively low number, maybe 20% could be as high as it could be, because there's a
Still a
lot of
lot.
I mean, there's still a lot, but there's a lot of regular factories in China, that aren't necessarily bad factories.
And I mean, do we know any specific companies, or is it pretty much everyone? And you don't know because, like, again, it could be the particles within our phones. It could be like a material that, I don't know, we produce something like a computer screen, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of times it's just one part, or even just the raw materials or the packaging. One of the trucks that I followed from a camp actually went to an Apple factory, an official Apple supplier. The same address was listed on their website.
Yeah.
And, I'd imagine it wasn't the whole iPhone that was assembled in a labor camp. It might have just been a small, very small part of the packaging, because these products tend to be more high tech and difficult to be made from scratch in a camp. Um, but there's it's all kinds of brands have been implicated. The In last year, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute released a pretty damning report that found 82 major brands using Uyghur forced labor And they included some pretty expensive brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz,
Oh
Nike,
wow.
and most. It's not just the cheap stuff. I don't know what isn't made in a camp these days. I think we really need to. I think the question is not asking which brands are using it, but which brands are not using Uyghur forced labor, and what are they doing to what are our brands actually doing to discourage factories from using forced labor, and are any of them actually revisiting and auditing their sourcing practices to see if they're playing any role in encouraging factories to use forced labor? Because during my research, I found that a lot of times it's actually the corporations, the Western corporations, that sometimes give such short production deadlines or offer such cheap prices for their products that the factory has no choice but to outsource work to a labor camp.
Mm.
Um, and so these are factors that our companies can control, and these are factors that we as consumers can influence. So made in China is not just about the terrible, terrible human rights abuses on the other side of the world that we're powerless to affect. It's also about empowering consumers how to be more educated about what we should be looking for when we look at a company's sustainability page. Because right now, most companies' sustainability pages are pretty weak. They may list the addresses of the factories that they're sourcing from, or may list their names, but rarely do you see anyone providing an in-depth um, explanation of their actual relationship with the factory, what kind of a deadline they give them, how much time they give them to make the products, what kind of prices they're paying them. But those are kind of the important factors to know if we really want to be sure that a particular company is doing everything they can to prevent forced labor in their supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, we are complicit in a way. I mean, I moved to the US about 8 years ago, and going from house to house here, visiting different people, I would go see these big houses, and you go up the attic or you go in the basement, it's just filled with shit. It's just filled with
Yeah,
stuff that presents from 3
yeah,
Christmases ago, just so much shit. I've never seen so much stuff in my life. And then you have to have another like storage facility for all the other stuff that they may have that they currently are not using, but maybe will in the future. And it's just a lot of stuff. And honestly, I was kind of mind blown. I've just never seen so much things before. And we like here in the US, we like goods, and there's so many reasons and so many holidays and so many Black Fridays to buy stuff, and it's the cheapest and it's convenient and affordable, and 2 clicks on your computer, and it's on your doorstep the next day, right?
hmm
And we never really stop and think, wait, how is this made? Who made this? Is it good for the environment? Is it bad for the environment? There are companies now that are starting to be quote unquote more responsible, both with humans and the environment and animals. But I feel like most of the time they're throwing out a lot of buzzwords and very, very little done. It's just mostly marketing.
Absolutely, right. Sustainability, ethically sourced. A lot of these words really are marketing buzzwords.
Yeah.
Um, they don't reveal much about what they're actually doing to be sustainable. I'm curious, where did you move here from?
Israel.
Oh, Israel. Okay,
Yeah. So
I
very,
see.
very small. Everything is much smaller. It's like the
Yeah.
size of New Jersey.
hmm hmm Yeah.
So
Um,
yeah.
Do you see any? I mean, I hate to make the direct comparison because you can't compare it, but do you see, does it remind you at all of the Holocaust, what's happening to the Uyghurs right now?
I mean, I don't like comparing, but it is a Holocaust. I mean, if you take a definition, it's taking people against their will, because of their ethnic background, because of their religion, because of their whatever they are, right? Immutable characteristics that are beyond them, and you put them in these camps. And I don't know what exactly what goes on in those camps. It's horrific. It's essentially the same. It is. I mean, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, Rian Thum, a historian, pointed out something pretty chilling, which is that the Jewish Holocaust that didn't start off. Those camps didn't start off as death camps,
Hmm.
um, but they gradually, over the course of years, um, became that. While the world was silent and did little uh, to address it until after 6 million people died.
Yeah.
And right now we're detaining millions of Uyghurs, and there's no reports that these are death camps, but there's really not much that would stop them from becoming it.
But they kind of really are. I mean, if you're handing out organs like it's M&Ms, that really is. I mean, it's atrocities. It's the same thing as the Nazis would do, right? They're just
Yeah,
taking humans and using them as they wish, essentially as a business or as whatever they want. They're essentially doing whatever they want, and it's horrific. My grandparents were in the Holocaust. They didn't really speak about it too much. But I know some of the things that happened there, and through like a personal account. And I think we all thought that those type of things were behind us, that these things don't happen in a modern society, that we've I don't know, that we're not that we're far from a utopia, but I don't know. I thought that was a lesson for the world, that these type of things should never happen again, and they keep happening, right? They happen in,
hmm
there was genocide in Rwanda, and there's Armenian, and there's it every few years something pops up, and it just seems like people we we don't learn, we just don't learn our lessons.
we don't learn, and corporations continue to profit from these genocides. I mean, there were a lot of companies, including Volkswagen, that took advantage of the labor in the concentration camps
Yeah.
during the Holocaust.
Hmm.
And today, Volkswagen has a pretty big plant in Xinjiang, uh, where the Uyghur forced labor is the rate of forced labor there is so high that you can't guarantee that your products and your materials aren't made by forced labor. But as late as 2019, I believe, the CEO of Volkswagen said he hadn't heard of the Uyghurs when asked about the camps. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always very easy to say. Oh, we just didn't know. We're going to do the education. We're going to learn now. It's always the same shtick. It's not very believable. This is something I wanted to ask. My my grandfather, he was an only child during the Holocaust time, and he was essentially on the streets making a living through, I don't know, doing whatever he needed to. He was essentially on the streets from like the age of 10, and I think around the age of 18 or so, he moved to Israel, and he built, a business, and then he built a family, and he managed to survive. And he going through the Holocaust as a kid on the streets, is not easy. And when you see what happens around the world to Uyghurs, to other populations in other countries, and you realize what actual oppression is.
hmm
And then when I hear about people here kind of complaining about it, about how hard their lives are with their phones and their social media and living in a big house, and it kind of just rubs me a little bit the wrong way when I'm like, there's actual hardships that are happening in the world, and you being maybe a little, um I don't know, someone said something that you didn't like is not the same thing as being actually oppressed in a country that kills people for anything they want, essentially.
I get what you're saying. I think it's two different issues in a way. It's I think it's still worth talking about and getting upset about issues that are in the U.S. that are affecting people. I think there's room in our hearts to care about both. There's problems on the other side of the world in China and also problems in the US. I don't think it has to be so black and white, one or the other.
Yeah. No, I mean the US is far from perfect, but it's definitely much better than the majority of other countries in the world as far as equality, as far as politeness and just overall kindness. I mean, for the most part, it's okay. It's pretty good.
I guess it depends on the area and the demographic. You also do have a pretty high amount of maybe uh, just the imprisonment. The American prison problem is also pretty big,
That is.
and that's a whole other animal.
Yeah. And I mean, does would China obviously has economic aspirations. They want to be the dominant power in the world, but do they also have, ideological aspirations to export certain maybe Chinese ideas, cultures, and ideologies, kind of like the US has been doing for the last half century or so?
I'm so sorry. Somebody opened the door. One second. Oh, sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Sure, sure. I was just saying that China obviously has economic aspirations. They want to be the dominant, superpower in the world. But do they have ideological aspirations that they want to export as well? Ideas, cultures to the rest of the world, kind of like the US has been doing for the last half century?
Oh yes, I think every country does. um, but yeah, especially China. They want to convey their message of what China is, which is that um, that's a whole other book. I don't think I'm the first person to actually talk about it. If that's okay.
Yeah, no worries. All right, so I know I recently read about Ilham Todi. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Who was an outspoken critic of the government, and he was kind of, I don't know if Mandela is the right word, but the Mandela for the Uyghur people, right? Like he was outspoken. He championed them, and in 2014 he got sentenced for life for some bogus separatist charges. What is the current situation with him?
His situation is not good. He's still in prison, and it's really hard to get any updates about how his health is and what his life is actually like in there. And his daughter has been doing a lot to try to raise awareness to his story and what's been happening in Xinjiang. But no, I can't say that there's been any improvement for how he's doing.
Oh, okay. Is there, I don't know, some nonprofit? Is there like organizations that are working with him to maybe make sure that maybe he gets released one day, or maybe that his message gets out, or anything like that?
There's a lot of organizations, including the Uyghur Human Rights Project, that's been doing good work over the years. Um, I think unless the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act passes, there's not much else that can actually influence any kind of big policy changes or influence China to release any prominent political prisoners like Toti.
Hmm. Okay. And before I let you go, I want to ask just one final question. It seems like there's less and less respected, truth seeking, hardcore kind of investigative journalists that are really seeking to tell untold stories and cover truths just like you have. And it seems like there's more kind of salacious clickbait, politically driven news articles and headlines. What is your take on the current state of news media?
Well, I think there's both. There is still good journalism
Yeah.
happening, but there's also a lot of I think it's because the news business model just isn't really sustainable at the moment. a lot of publications do depend on clickbaity articles to get the clicks and to get the advertisement money.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think there needs to be a big rethink of how news media do business in a sustainable way so that they could actually have the funds to do real journalism. But that's not to say that there isn't good journalism out there. I know ProPublica is doing great work. The New York Times does have a lot of people dedicated to investigative journalism. So I'm hopeful that journalism will stay alive.
I hope so too. We need it.
Yeah.
Now more than ever. Amelia, thank you so much for your time. Guys, the book Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods. Go pick it up. It is eye-opening, insightful, and a story that has to be told. So, Amelia, thank you so much. And where can people find you? Where are the best places to find you on the internet?
Thank you, Roy. I'm on Twitter, on Instagram. My website is ameliapeng.com. And yeah, and I just want to mention again that I know this talk has been so depressing during most of the hour, but Made in China is ultimately about actionable steps that the average person like me and you and the average consumer can take to really influence how our companies source from factories, and to influence how lucrative it would be for Chinese factories to use forced labor. So I do hope listeners will feel empowered by the book rather than just depressed by how the state of the world is.
I mean, there's hard conversations. There's certain things where, I know sometimes I'll bring up when I'm sitting with friends and I'll bring up a topic and everyone kind of like you see their mood change. But there's certain things sometimes you have to talk about and they're not fun to talk about, but
No,
they have to be discussed.
no, they're not. But I appreciate you, Roy, for willing to discuss it, even though it's not exactly a cup of tea.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to do it. I love to talk about everything, especially when there's someone that is trying to suppress this type of information out there. So I hope, like I said, I hope people hear this. I hope if they didn't know about this before, they know about it now. And if they already knew about it, I hope they take some action. And one of the first actions they can do is buy the book, get more information, and I hope we can do something. I hope we can make some sort of a change.
Thanks, Roy. Look forward to more of your podcasts.
Thank you so much, Amelia. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.